Imagine this. You stand at a zoo enclosure watching a chimpanzee. The creature watches you back with eyes that seem almost human, intelligence flickering behind them. It uses tools, mourns its dead, forms complex social bonds. You share 98.8% of your DNA with this animal. Yet somehow, in that tiny remaining fraction, something extraordinary happened. Somewhere in the vast expanse of evolutionary time, a mental bridge was crossed that no other species has managed to traverse. The chimpanzee will never contemplate the stars, compose a symphony, or wonder about its own existence. You will. What exactly lies in that gap? What is the missing mental link that transformed apes into astronomers, hunters into philosophers, survivors into storytellers? Tonight, we walk carefully along that invisible boundary, that strange cognitive chasm where humans diverged from every other mind on Earth. And if you listen closely, you might hear the echo of the moment when our ancestors made a leap that changed not just their future, but the entire character of life on this planet. The difference between humans and other animals is immediately obvious if you look at what we have built. Cities stretch toward the sky, vessels journey beyond our atmosphere, networks of information span the globe in milliseconds. We have split the atom, decoded our own genetic blueprint, and captured images of galaxies billions of light years away. We create art that moves us to tears, music that stirs something deep within, stories that persist for thousands of years. We ponder mortality, construct elaborate belief systems, and spend entire lifetimes searching for meaning in our existence. No other species does anything remotely comparable, but this observation, as striking as it appears, only describes the outcome. It tells us what happened, not why it happened, or how. When you observe animals in their natural environments, the picture becomes more complicated. Chimpanzees fashion tools from branches, using them to extract termites from mounds with practiced efficiency. They select appropriate twigs, strip away leaves, and even modify the thickness to match the termite mound's openings. They pass these techniques down through generations, with different populations developing distinct traditions. A chimpanzee born in one region may learn to crack nuts using stone hammers and anvils, while a chimpanzee in another area learns to use leaves as sponges for collecting water. These are cultural differences, knowledge transmitted not through genes but through observation and practice. Crows in certain regions craft hooks from wire, bending the material with their beaks to create tools for extracting food from narrow containers. They can solve multi-step puzzles that require sequential actions, remembering which steps worked and which failed. New Caledonian crows create tools of different designs, and even manufacture tools to make other tools, a level of foresight once thought unique to humans. Elephants demonstrate profound emotional depth, gathering around their dead in what appears to be ritual mourning, sometimes returning to the bones of deceased family members years later, touching them gently with their trunks as if remembering. Dolphins give themselves individual names, signature whistles that they use to identify themselves and address each other. Mother dolphins teach these names to their calves, who keep them throughout their lives. Dolphins form complex social networks, cooperate in hunting, and even appear to have regional dialects, different groups using slightly different patterns in their vocalizations. They play, they mourn, they recognize themselves in mirrors, suggesting some level of self-awareness that hints at an inner mental life. Octopuses solve problems through trial and error, displaying creativity and individual personality, despite having nervous systems that evolved entirely independently from vertebrates. They can open jars, navigate mazes, recognize individual humans, and even engage in play, suggesting they experience something beyond mere survival instinct. Their intelligence arose through a completely separate evolutionary pathway from ours, showing that complex cognition can emerge through multiple routes. The list continues. Whales sing songs that change and evolve over years, suggesting cultural transmission of complex information. Humpback whales in different oceans have different songs, and within populations, songs gradually shift over seasons, with all males learning and singing the new variations. This is cultural change happening in real time, innovation spreading through a population. Bees communicate the precise location of food sources through elaborate dances, encoding distance and direction in movement. The waggle dance conveys not just where food is, but how far away. how abundant, even how high quality. This information transfer allows the hive to make collective decisions about where to forage. Meerkats teach their young how to handle dangerous prey, adjusting their lessons based on the student's progress. Young meerkats first receive dead scorpions to practice on, then disabled scorpions, then fully functional but supervised scorpions, a graduated training program that resembles teaching. Bonobos engage in complex social politics, forming alliances and negotiating conflicts in ways that mirror human behavior. They comfort distressed individuals, share food preferentially with those who have helped them, and use social bonds to navigate the challenges of group living. Even rats demonstrate something resembling empathy, choosing to free trapped companions rather than claim food rewards for themselves. In experiments, rats will work to release other rats from uncomfortable restraints, even when there is no benefit to themselves, suggesting they respond to the distress of others. The animal kingdom brims with intelligence, with problem-solving, with social sophistication, with behaviors that hint at inner worlds far richer than we once imagined. Each discovery makes the boundary between human and animal minds seem less absolute, less clear-cut. So why, given all these remarkable capabilities, has no other species built a library? Why have no animals developed written language, constructed scientific instruments, or left behind evidence of philosophical inquiry? If intelligence exists on a spectrum, and many animals clearly possess it in varying degrees, what explains the enormous gap between the smartest non-human minds and even the simplest human cultures? The puzzle deepens when you consider our close evolutionary relationship with other primates. The ancestral lines leading to humans and chimpanzees diverge perhaps 6 to 8 million years ago, a mere moment in geological time. Our last common ancestor was an ape, likely living in African forests, facing similar survival challenges as its descendants would face. Yet from that shared starting point, one branch produced creatures that wonder about their origins, while the other produced creatures that, however intelligent, remain bound to the immediate demands of survival. For many years, scientists believed they had identified the turning point. In the 1970s, the consensus centered on Europe 40,000 years ago, when elaborate cave paintings, carved figurines, and sophisticated tools suddenly appeared in the archaeological record. This explosion of creativity seemed to mark the moment when humans became truly human, when the modern mind emerged fully formed. Art was taken as definitive evidence of symbolic thought, the ability to represent one thing with another, to create meaning through abstraction. If humans in Europe were creating art while Neanderthals nearby apparently were not, then perhaps symbolic thinking formed the clear dividing line between species. But this timeline presented a problem. The earliest fossils of anatomically modern humans came from Africa and dated to roughly 200,000 years ago, more than 150,000 years before the European cave paintings appeared. Were these early humans somehow different mentally, despite looking physically identical to us? Some researchers proposed that a genetic mutation occurred around 40,000 years ago, triggering an abrupt revolution in human cognition. This theory suggested that the modern human mind emerged suddenly, like a switch being flipped, transforming our species from smart apes into something entirely new. Then, archaeologists working in Africa began making discoveries that dismantled this neat narrative. At Blombos Cave on the South African coast, researchers found pieces of ochre, a soft reddish stone, engraved with geometric patterns and dating to 72,000 years ago. They discovered ancient containers made from abalone shells, still holding residues of paint that humans had mixed from charcoal, crushed bone, and iron-rich minerals 100,000 years in the past. At other sites, they uncovered shell beads carefully pierced for stringing, evidence of personal adornment dating back more than 70,000 years. Some findings pushed symbolic behavior back even further, to possibly 164,000 years ago. These artifacts revealed something profound. The people who created them were thinking symbolically, combining materials to produce new substances, planning for future use, probably decorating themselves or others with meaningful patterns. They were engaging in abstract thought, storing information, transmitting cultural knowledge. The mixing of paint alone required multiple cognitive steps. Someone had to recognize that different materials could be combined, experiment with proportions, discover that certain mixtures produce stable pigments. They needed to plan ahead, gathering materials that would not be used, immediately storing the mixture for later application. This is not simple trial and error. This is systematic experimentation guided by understanding of cause and effect. The engraved ochre pieces present their own mysteries. The geometric patterns, cross-hatching and parallel lines, have no obvious practical function. They are not instructions, not maps, not tallies. They appear to be decorative, aesthetic, or perhaps symbolic in ways we cannot fully interpret. But their very existence tells us something important. Someone took time and effort to create patterns that had meaning beyond the immediate demands of survival. Someone was expressing something, communicating something, marking something as significant. This is the hallmark of symbolic thought, the capacity to infuse objects with meanings that transcend their physical properties. The shell beads push this even further back in time. At sites like Blombos and School Cave in Israel, pierced shells have been found dating back more than 100,000 years, possibly even to 164,000 years ago. These shells were collected from beaches, deliberately pierced using tools, probably strung together as necklaces or bracelets. Why? Personal adornment has no survival value in the immediate sense. It does not help you hunt better or gather more food or avoid predators. Its value is social, communicative, symbolic. Beads declare identity, signal group membership, display status, or mark important life transitions. They exist because the people wearing them lived in a world of social meanings, a world where objects could carry significance beyond their utility. The so-called creative explosion in Europe was not the origin of modern cognition but merely its echo, a later expression of mental capacities that had emerged much earlier in Africa, possibly emerging alongside our species itself. The gap between when the human body evolved and when the human mind evolved was narrowing, perhaps disappearing entirely. We were not dealing with a sudden mutation that rewired the brain overnight. We were dealing with something more subtle, more gradual, more mysterious. The human mind, it seemed, had been modern from or very near the beginning. What changed over time was not the underlying cognitive capacity, but its expression, its elaboration, the cumulative cultural achievements that this capacity made possible. This realization shifted the question. If modern human cognition has been with our species from or near its beginning, then the critical transformation happened deeper in our past, somewhere in the lineage leading to Homo sapiens. The mystery was not about a late addition to an otherwise ordinary primate, but about a fundamental divergence that defined our species from its inception. Something changed in our evolutionary line, something that allowed for symbolic thought, complex planning, abstract reasoning. But what exactly was that something? And why did it happen to us, and not to our extinct cousins or our living primate relatives? Why did Neanderthals, with brains as large as ours, not produce the same explosion of cultural innovation? Why did other hominins, who also made tools and controlled fire, not cross this cognitive threshold? The period between approximately 70,000 and 30,000 years ago holds a special significance in understanding human uniqueness. Researchers call this span the cognitive revolution, though the term can be misleading. It was not a revolution in the sense of a sudden overthrow, but rather a critical period when distinctively human mental abilities became fully expressed, when the foundations laid earlier began producing visible results. During this window, something profound was happening inside human minds. The question is what triggered it and what defined it. One influential theory points to language as the catalyst. Not simple communication, which many animals possess, but true language, with all its unique properties. The argument suggests that sometime in this period, perhaps through genetic changes, perhaps through cultural development, humans acquired the capacity for complex grammatical language. This was not just an improvement in existing communication, but something qualitatively different, something that would reshape thought itself. Consider what human language actually does. A vervet monkey can make distinct alarm calls for different predators. One call means eagle, another means leopard, a third means snake. This is communication, and it is sophisticated, but it has strict limits. The monkey cannot say, "Yesterday I saw a leopard near the waterhole, but it was not hunting, so we were safe." It cannot express past events, conditional situations or abstract states like safety, it cannot combine its calls into new meanings or generate infinite variations. Its communication system, however useful, remains fundamentally finite and tied to immediate circumstances. Human language breaks free of these constraints through what linguists call recursion and hierarchical structure. We do not just string words together linearly. We embed phrases within phrases, clauses within clauses, building structures of potentially infinite complexity from finite elements. The sentence, the scientist who discovered that the theorem which proves the hypothesis is incomplete, contains multiple layers of embedding, each element fitting into a larger grammatical architecture. This recursive property allows human language to express anything that can be thought, to discuss things absent, imaginary, past, future, or purely conceptual. It turns language into a tool not just for communication but for thought itself. No animal communication system exhibits this property. Birdsong can be complex and melodic, but even the most elaborate songs follow fixed patterns. Whale songs change over time, suggesting cultural transmission, but they do not create new messages through systematic recombination of elements. When researchers have tried to teach primates human-like language, the results have been telling. Apes can learn to associate symbols with objects and can even combine 2 or 3 symbols to express simple meanings. But they never develop grammar, never create genuinely novel sentences, never demonstrate the open-ended generativity that even human children master effortlessly. The gulf between animal communication and human language remains unbridged. The evolution of this capacity remains mysterious. Some researchers propose that a genetic mutation altered the neural wiring necessary for processing hierarchical structures, perhaps involving genes like FOXP2, which is known to affect language development. Others suggest that language evolved gradually, building on pre-existing cognitive abilities through natural selection. The debate continues partly because language leaves no direct fossil evidence. We cannot know for certain when our ancestors first spoke in grammatically complex sentences. We can only infer it from the archaeological record, from the appearance of behaviours that seem to require language to coordinate and transmit. What we do know is that language fundamentally restructured human cognition. With language, we could hold complex ideas in mind, break them into component parts, recombine them in new ways. We could share detailed information about techniques and knowledge, allowing cultural innovations to spread and accumulate. We could plan collaboratively, discussing potential futures and coordinating actions across time and space. We could teach abstract concepts to the next generation, not through demonstration but through explanation. Language created a feedback loop, where better communication enabled better thinking, which enabled better communication, which enabled better thinking, each iteration expanding what human minds could do. But language alone cannot explain everything that makes humans unique. After all, language is itself a symbolic system, which means humans must have had the capacity for symbolic thought before or alongside the development of language. This capacity, the ability to let one thing represent another without any physical connection between them, appears to be equally fundamental to human uniqueness. It might even be the deeper foundation on which language itself was built. Symbols are everywhere in human life, so commonplace that we rarely stop to consider how strange they are. The word tree has no resemblance to an actual tree. It is arbitrary marks on a page or sounds in the air that we have collectively agreed will represent the concept of a tree. A flag is cloth dyed in certain patterns, yet people will die defending it because it symbolizes nation, identity, belonging. Mathematical equations are abstract symbols representing relationships between quantities that may have no physical form at all. Religious icons, corporate logos, wedding rings, musical notation, all are symbols. They mean what they mean because we decide they mean it, because we can hold in our minds both the physical object and what it represents. This capacity for symbolic thought is difficult to find in animals. Some researchers claim that certain apes demonstrate rudimentary symbolic abilities, using signs or tokens to represent objects or concepts. But these cases remain controversial, and even the most generous interpretations suggest only the faintest echo of human symbolic capacity. No animal creates elaborate symbolic systems, develops abstract art, or uses symbols to build imaginary worlds. The archaeological evidence from Blombos Cave and similar sites shows humans engaging in symbolic behaviour at least 70 to 100,000 years ago, creating geometric patterns, mixing paints, crafting ornaments. These activities have no immediate survival value. Their purpose appears to be representational, decorative, meaningful in a way that transcends utility. What makes symbolic thought so powerful is that it liberates meaning from physical constraint. Once you can use a symbol to represent anything, you can think about things that do not exist. You can imagine alternate realities, construct hypothetical scenarios, develop abstract categories. You can create mathematics, where symbols represent pure relationships. You can develop language, where sounds represent concepts. You can make art, where physical forms express emotional or spiritual meanings. You can build entire systems of thought, philosophy, theology, science, all resting on the foundation of symbols representing ideas that have no tangible form. Some researchers believe symbolic thought emerged alongside language in a co-evolutionary process. As humans developed more sophisticated communication, they needed ways to represent complex ideas, which drove the evolution of symbolic capacity. As symbolic capacity grew, it enabled more complex communication, which drove language to become more sophisticated. The two abilities reinforced each other, each making the other more useful and more powerful. Other researchers suggest symbolic thought came first, perhaps arising from the need to represent absent objects or future events, and language emerged later as a way to share and manipulate these symbolic representations. Regardless of which came first, the combination of language and symbolic thought created something unprecedented in the history of life on Earth. It allowed humans to construct what anthropologists call collective fictions, shared imaginary realities that exist only because we collectively believe in them. Nations, corporations, money, laws, human rights, gods, all are collective fictions. None exist in physical reality. You cannot find justice under a microscope or weigh democracy on a scale. Yet these imaginary entities shape human behavior as powerfully as any physical force. They allow millions of strangers to cooperate toward common goals, to organize themselves into functioning societies, to create institutions that persist across generations. No animal has anything comparable. Chimpanzees form complex social hierarchies, but these hierarchies are based on direct personal relationships and physical dominance. They cannot create abstract institutions, cannot establish systems of rules that apply to individuals who have never met, cannot organize cooperation among strangers based on shared belief in imaginary entities. A human can convince millions of people they have never met to follow rules, make sacrifices, or pursue collective goals simply by invoking symbols and fictions that everyone has agreed to believe in. This capacity to create and inhabit shared imaginary worlds is uniquely human. It is also what makes human cultures possible, and what allows human cooperation to scale to levels far beyond anything seen in other species. Perhaps equally important to understanding human uniqueness is our capacity for what psychologists call theory of mind, the ability to understand that other individuals have minds distinct from our own, with their own beliefs, desires, and knowledge. At a basic level, this involves recognizing that others see things from different perspectives, both literally and figuratively. At more sophisticated levels, it involves understanding that others can have false beliefs, that they might not know things you know, that their mental states influence their behavior in predictable ways. Human children develop theory of mind gradually, typically mastering it by age 4 or 5. They learn that mom might not know where dad hid the cookies, that their friend might believe something that is not true, that people act based on what they think is real rather than what actually is real. This seems simple, but it requires a complex cognitive leap, a kind of mental simulation where you model another mind inside your own mind and run scenarios to predict how that other person will think and behave. The question of whether animals possess theory of mind has generated decades of research and intense debate. Early studies suggested chimpanzees understood others' visual perspectives, knowing what another chimp could or could not see. More recent and more carefully controlled experiments have produced mixed results. Chimpanzees appear to understand what others can see and might make simple inferences about goals or intentions, but they show little convincing evidence of understanding false beliefs or knowledge states. They seem not to grasp that another individual might believe something different from reality, or might lack information that they themselves possess. The evidence for theory of mind in other animals is even weaker. Some researchers claim dolphins demonstrate aspects of social cognition that might reflect theory of mind. Studies of scrub jays suggest these birds account for what other birds have witnessed when deciding where to cache food. But alternative explanations exist for all these behaviours, interpretations that do not require the animals to actually model other minds. The most parsimonious conclusion, based on current evidence, is that while some animals show glimmers of perspective taking, none demonstrate the full theory of mind that humans routinely employ. Why does this matter? Because theory of mind fundamentally changes how you can interact with others. If you understand that others have different knowledge than you can teach strategically, providing information they lack. If you understand that others have beliefs that might be false, you can deceive them deliberately, planning your behaviour to manipulate what they think. If you understand that others have desires and goals different from yours, you can negotiate, compromise, cooperate toward mutually beneficial ends even when your immediate interests conflict. Theory of mind is what makes humans such extraordinarily social creatures, able to navigate complex webs of relationships, form large cooperative groups, and transmit culture with precision and intentionality. Closely related to theory of mind is another cognitive capacity called metacognition, the ability to think about your own thinking. Humans do this constantly and consciously. We know when we know something and when we do not. We experience uncertainty as a distinct mental state and can report on our confidence levels. We can reflect on our own thought processes, analysing how we reached a conclusion or why we made a mistake. We can deliberately improve our thinking strategies, learning to learn more effectively. Do animals have metacognition? Some studies suggest that certain species might. Dolphins and some primates, when given difficult perceptual tasks, will sometimes choose to opt out or request easier trials, behaviour that could indicate they know when they are uncertain. But interpreting these studies is challenging. The animals might simply be responding to internal states of stress or confusion without actually reflecting on their own knowledge. They might be using behavioural rules they have learned, choosing the opt-out response when they receive certain cues, without any conscious awareness that they lack knowledge. The strongest evidence for animal metacognition comes from carefully designed experiments where animals must monitor their own memory or perceptual certainty. Even here, the results remain ambiguous. While some behaviours are consistent with metacognition, they can usually also be explained through simpler mechanisms that do not require the animal to consciously reflect on its own mental states. Humans, by contrast, clearly and unmistakably possess metacognition. We can introspect, report on our own thoughts, deliberately control our cognitive processes. This ability to observe and regulate our own minds gives humans a kind of cognitive flexibility that appears absent or minimal in other species. The implications extend beyond individual cognition. Metacognition allows humans to be self-critical, to recognize the limits of their own knowledge, to seek out information to fill gaps in understanding. It enables us to learn from mistakes more effectively, because we can analyze not just what went wrong, but how our thinking led us astray. It supports complex teaching, where the teacher monitors the student's understanding and adjusts instruction accordingly. It makes possible the scientific method, where researchers consciously guard against their own biases and design experiments to minimize the influence of subjective expectations. Metacognition, in other words, is what allows humans to systematically improve their own thinking, to bootstrap their way to ever higher levels of understanding. But even with language, symbolic thought, theory of mind, and metacognition, we have not yet reached the heart of what makes humans unique. There is one more piece, perhaps, the most important piece of all. It is the capacity for cumulative culture, the ability to build on the knowledge and innovations of previous generations in a way that produces genuine progress over time. This is what separates human cultures from the traditions observed in some animal populations. Chimpanzees, as mentioned, have cultural traditions. Different groups use different techniques for cracking nuts or fishing for termites. These techniques are passed from one generation to the next through observation and imitation. This is cultural transmission, and it is impressive. But it is not cumulative. Chimpanzee nut cracking techniques have not improved over the thousands of generations since they were first observed. The same basic methods persist unchanged across centuries. If a particularly clever chimp invents a slight improvement, that improvement rarely spreads and almost never becomes the foundation for further refinement. Humans are different. When a human invents a better tool or technique, others can learn it, modify it, improve upon it. Each generation inherits not just the innovations of their immediate predecessors, but the accumulated innovations of hundreds or thousands of previous generations. This creates what researchers call the ratchet effect. Progress is not just possible but cumulative. Knowledge builds on knowledge, techniques grow more sophisticated, understanding deepens. Even if one generation makes only a tiny contribution, over many generations these tiny contributions compound into transformations that no single individual or generation could have achieved. Consider how this works in practice. An early human discovers that striking certain stones together produces sharp flakes. This knowledge spreads. Someone else notices that heating stones before striking them makes better flakes. This refinement spreads. Another person discovers that pressure applied precisely can create long, thin blades rather than irregular flakes. Each improvement becomes standard practice, the foundation for the next innovation. Over thousands of years, this process transforms simple stone flaking into an art form, producing blades so thin and sharp that they rival modern surgical tools. No single person invented these sophisticated techniques. They emerged through countless small improvements, each building on what came before. This is why human technology, unlike anything seen in other species, shows clear directionality over time. Stone tools became more complex across hundreds of thousands of years. Simple choppers gave way to hand axes, which gave way to finely crafted blades, which gave way to composite tools with multiple parts, which gave way to tools for making tools. Each step built on previous steps. Each innovation enabled further innovations, and critically, this process accelerated. As humans developed better ways to store and transmit information, through language, through teaching, through eventually writing, the pace of cultural evolution increased. What took thousands of years in the Paleolithic took hundreds of years in the Neolithic, decades in the Industrial Revolution, years in the Information Age. A person born in 1700 lived in a world not dramatically different from the world of 1700 BC. Agriculture, metalworking, sailing ships, cities, writing. These technologies had been refined but not fundamentally transformed over millennia. But a person born in 1900 lived to see automobiles, airplanes, radio, television, computers, space travel, the internet. The world transformed within a single lifetime because cumulative culture had accelerated to unprecedented speeds. This acceleration itself reveals something important. Cumulative culture is not just additive, it is multiplicative. Each new tool or technique or concept does not just add to what came before, it opens new possibilities. The invention of writing did not just preserve existing knowledge, it enabled new forms of thought. Mathematical notation made possible calculations too complex to perform mentally. The scientific method created systematic ways to test ideas and accumulate reliable knowledge. Computers enabled simulations and analyses beyond human capability. Each innovation became infrastructure for further innovation. Each breakthrough expanded the space of possibilities. Cumulative culture depends on all the other cognitive capacities we have discussed. It requires language to transmit complex information accurately across generations. A technique involving multiple steps, precise timings, and specific materials cannot be taught through demonstration alone. It requires explanation, discussion, correction, the kind of detailed information transfer that only language enables. It requires symbolic thought to represent abstract concepts and preserve them in forms that outlast individual lives. Mathematical concepts, scientific principles, philosophical ideas, all exist as symbols that can be recorded, studied, debated, refined across centuries. It requires theory of mind to teach effectively, understanding what others know and what they need to learn. A good teacher does not just demonstrate or explain. A good teacher monitors the student's understanding, adjusts the pace and detail of instruction, anticipates difficulties, provides appropriate feedback. This requires modeling the student's mind, running simulations of what they understand and what confuses them. Animals can show their young what to do. but they cannot assess whether the young one grasps the underlying principle or merely mimics the surface behaviour. It requires metacognition to evaluate and improve existing knowledge systematically. Human cultures do not just accumulate information randomly. We assess what works and what does not, discard failed approaches, refine successful ones, deliberately seek better methods. This requires thinking about thinking, examining our own beliefs and practices, recognizing when we are wrong and correcting course. Each of these abilities is necessary but not sufficient. Only in combination do they enable the ratchet effect, the cumulative building of knowledge that characterizes human cultures and no other. The result is that humans became the only species whose way of life changes fundamentally across generations, not through biological evolution but through cultural evolution. A human born 10,000 years ago had essentially the same biological brain as a human born today. But the knowledge available to them, the tools they used, the societies they lived in, differed as radically as Stone Age villages differ from modern cities. This is unprecedented in the history of complex life. Evolution normally operates through changes in genes, which requires many generations and produces change very slowly. Cultural evolution operates through changes in knowledge and techniques, which can happen rapidly, sometimes within a single lifetime. This gives humans an adaptive flexibility unmatched by any other species. So what is the missing mental link that made humans different from animals? The answer, as these explorations reveal, is that there is no single missing link. There is instead a constellation of interrelated cognitive abilities, each reinforcing the others, together producing something greater than the sum of its parts. Language gave humans a tool for complex thought and communication. Symbolic thought allowed the creation of abstract representations and shared imaginary realities. Theory of mind enabled sophisticated social cognition and intentional teaching. Metacognition provided self-awareness and cognitive control. Cumulative culture created a ratchet effect where knowledge could build across generations. None of these abilities arose in isolation. They co-evolved, each making the others more useful, each driving selection for the others. Better language made symbolic thought more symbolic, powerful, which made teaching more effective, which accelerated cultural accumulation, which created selection pressure for even better language. The feedback loops ran in multiple directions, creating what some researchers call a cognitive niche, an entire suite of adaptations centered on thinking, knowing, learning, and sharing information. What triggered this process remains uncertain. Perhaps it began with an increase in brain size, which allowed more computational power for processing complex information. Perhaps it started with changes to the larynx and vocal tract that enabled more sophisticated vocalization. Perhaps it was driven by social pressures in increasingly large groups that favored individuals who could navigate complex social relationships. Perhaps it was multiple factors working together, mutations and selection pressures aligning in just the right way. The specific sequence of events may never be fully known, lost in the deep past beyond the reach of archaeological or genetic evidence. What is clear is that at some point in human evolutionary history, likely before the emergence of Homo sapiens as a distinct species, our lineage crossed a threshold. The cognitive abilities that define humanity began reinforcing each other, creating a positive feedback loop that accelerated cognitive evolution. By the time anatomically modern humans appeared perhaps 300,000 years ago, the basic cognitive architecture was in place. The evidence from Blombos Cave and other sites shows this architecture was already producing symbolic thought, complex planning, cultural traditions. The subsequent tens of thousands of years saw these abilities flower and intensify, producing the full range of human behaviors we observe today. Understanding this helps explain why the gap between humans and other animals seems so vast, despite our close genetic relationship with other primates. It is not that humans possess some single magical ingredient that other species entirely lack. It is that we possess a specific combination of cognitive abilities, each moderately sophisticated on its own, but together creating something qualitatively new. Language without symbolic thought would be useful but limited. Symbolic thought without language could not be effectively transmitted. Theory of mind without cumulative culture could not produce civilization. Each piece depends on the others, and together they form a cognitive system that operates on principles fundamentally different from what is found in any other species. This also helps explain why attempts to teach language to apes, while they produce some results, inevitably hit limits. Apes can learn some aspects of symbolic communication, but they lack the full complement of cognitive abilities necessary for human-style language. They do not naturally develop theory of mind at human levels, which limits their ability to understand communication as an intentional sharing of information. They do not engage in cumulative culture, which limits their ability to build on what they learn. Their cognitive architecture, however impressive, is not the same as the human cognitive architecture, and the differences matter profoundly. Does this mean other species are simply inferior? That humans sit at the top of some evolutionary hierarchy? Not at all. Evolution does not work that way. Different species are adapted to different niches, different ways of making a living in the world. Chimpanzees are exquisitely adapted to life in African forests, navigating complex three-dimensional environments, foraging for diverse foods, managing intricate social relationships within their groups. They do not need symbolic thought or cumulative culture for their way of life. Humans, by contrast, adapted to a cognitive niche, becoming specialists in thinking, planning, sharing information, and solving problems through cultural rather than genetic means. This strategy happened to lead to extraordinary technological success, but that does not make it inherently superior, merely different. Yet the difference matters, particularly when we ask questions about consciousness, about subjective experience, about what it is like to be another kind of creature. Do animals with complex social behaviors experience something like human social emotions? Do animals with problem-solving abilities experience something like human curiosity or satisfaction? Do animals suffer in ways comparable to human suffering? These questions become more difficult when we recognize that human cognitive architecture might produce forms of experience unavailable to other minds. Our capacity for symbolic thought might mean we experience meanings and significances that other animals cannot. Our metacognition might produce a kind of self-awareness qualitatively different from whatever self-awareness animals possess. Our theory of mind might allow us to imagine others' experiences in ways that fundamentally shape our own. At the same time, we should be cautious about assuming too much. The absence of human-style language or symbolic thought does not mean absence of rich inner life. Animals may experience the world in ways we cannot easily imagine or describe. A dog's sense of smell provides information vastly richer than what humans perceive. A bat's echolocation creates a sensory world entirely alien to human experience. An octopus's distributed nervous system might produce a form of consciousness radically unlike our own. The fact that we cannot fully understand or communicate with other minds does not mean those minds are simple or empty. It may simply mean that consciousness can take many forms, and human consciousness, for all its remarkable properties, is just one possibility among many. The missing mental link, then, is not a single thing, but a synergistic combination that emerged in one evolutionary lineage under specific circumstances. It created a kind of mind, capable of reflecting on its own nature, capable of asking how it came to be, capable of wondering about other minds and whether they wonder too. It created the capacity for science and philosophy, for art and mathematics, for history and prophecy. It made humans the only species that can tell stories about its own origins, that can debate its place in nature, that can construct elaborate theories about why it is unique. In doing so, it created a creature caught between two worlds, biological animals shaped by evolution, yet cultural beings capable of transcending biological limits through knowledge and technology. The journey from our last common ancestor with chimpanzees to modern humans involved countless small changes, most now lost to time. Some happened in genes, altering brain structures or vocal anatomy. Mutations affected the development of the prefrontal cortex, the region associated with planning and abstract thought. Changes to genes like FOXP2 influenced the neural circuits involved in vocal learning and production. Modifications to the larynx and vocal tract enabled more precise sound production, expanding the range of phonemes that could be distinguished and combined. Some changes happened in behavior, as cultural innovations changed how our ancestors lived and what selection pressures they faced. When early humans began using fire regularly, perhaps 800,000 years ago, it changed more than their diet. Cooking made nutrients more available, supporting larger brains, but fire also created gathering points, evening social time around flames when people could talk, share stories, strengthen social bonds. When humans began carrying tools over long distances, keeping them rather than making them fresh at each site, it suggested forward planning, the ability to anticipate future needs. When they began creating art and ornaments, it revealed minds concerned with more than immediate survival, minds engaged with meaning and beauty and social identity. The process was gradual, incremental, spanning millions of years, yet the result was a transformation as profound as any in the history of life. From animals that lived entirely in the present, evolution produced a species that remembers the past, imagines the future, and contemplates its own existence. From creatures bound by biology, it produced beings who create and inhabit worlds of meaning. From minds that could only know the immediate and tangible, it produced minds that can grasp the infinite and abstract. The transformation was not instantaneous, not the result of a single fortunate mutation, but the outcome of many changes accumulating, interacting, reinforcing each other across vast stretches of time. And still, the transformation continues. Human cognition is not finished evolving. Cultural evolution now shapes our minds as powerfully as genetic evolution once did. The invention of writing changed how humans think, externalizing memory and enabling new forms of analysis. Before writing, knowledge depended on human memory, limiting how much could be preserved and transmitted. With writing, knowledge could accumulate indefinitely, creating libraries, databases, repositories of information that transcended individual minds. The scientific method changed how humans seek knowledge, replacing intuition with systematic investigation. Instead of accepting traditional explanations or relying on authority, science demanded evidence, testing, reproducibility. It created a self-correcting system for understanding reality. Digital technology is changing how humans process information, creating new possibilities and new challenges for minds originally shaped for very different circumstances. The internet has made vast amounts of information instantly accessible, changing what it means to know something. Social media has created new forms of communication and connection, but also new challenges in distinguishing truth from falsehood. Artificial intelligence is beginning to augment human thinking in ways we're only starting to understand, handling certain cognitive tasks more efficiently than biological brains, while struggling with others that humans find intuitive. Where this ongoing evolution leads remains to be seen, but it is certain that the cognitive capacities that made us human continue to change us, continue to create new forms of thought, new ways of being, new frontiers of understanding. We are not the endpoint of human evolution, but another stage in a continuing process. The minds we have inherited from our ancestors will be shaped by our own innovations and passed forward, changed to whatever minds come after. The missing mental link is still missing in the sense that we do not fully understand it. We can identify components, trace some pathways, observe outcomes. But the deep mechanisms, the precise sequence of evolutionary events, the complete picture of how brain produces mind and mind produces culture, remain partially hidden, still subjects of research and debate. To understand the missing mental link more deeply, we need to look beneath behavior and language, beneath even thought itself, down into the biological structures that make human cognition possible. The human brain, that wrinkled mass of neural tissue weighing roughly 3 pounds, contains approximately 86 billion neurons, each forming thousands of connections with other neurons, creating a network of staggering complexity. But size alone does not explain uniqueness. Elephants have larger brains in absolute terms. Whales possess brains that dwarf human ones in sheer mass. Sperm whales, for instance, carry brains weighing nearly 20 pounds, more than 6 times heavier than the human brain. Yet these massive brains do not produce human-level cognition, at least not as far as we can observe. What matters is not just quantity, but organization, not just structure but developmental timing, not just what the brain is, but how it becomes what it is and what it does with its neural resources. The most obvious difference between human and other primate brains is expansion, particularly of the neocortex, the outer layer responsible for higher cognitive functions. This wrinkled surface, folded to pack more area into the limited space of the skull, handles conscious perception, voluntary movement, language, abstract reasoning, planning. When researchers compare human brains to those of chimpanzees, they find that while total brain size has increased dramatically from our common ancestor, certain regions have expanded disproportionately beyond what would be expected from simple scaling. The prefrontal cortex, located at the front of the brain and responsible for planning, decision-making, complex social reasoning, and executive control, occupies a significantly larger proportion of the human brain than it does in other primates. This is not simply scaling up. It represents a reorganization, a shift in priorities, a reallocation of neural resources towards certain functions. Studies measuring different brain regions across primates reveal that the great apes, humans, chimpanzees, gorillas, and orangutans all show expanded prefrontal regions compared to monkeys, but humans have taken this trend to an extreme. The frontal pole, the very front portion of the prefrontal cortex, is particularly enlarged in humans, accounting for a greater percentage of total brain volume than in any other primate. This region is associated with the highest levels of abstraction, with thinking about thinking, with planning multiple steps ahead, with considering hypothetical scenarios. Within the prefrontal cortex, the neurons themselves are different from those found in other species. Studies examining individual brain cells across primates reveal that human pyramidal neurons, the primary excitatory neurons in the cortex, have more complex dendritic trees than those of chimpanzees or monkeys. Dendrites are the branching extensions that receive input from other neurons, and more complex dendritic trees mean each neuron can receive information from more sources, integrate more signals, participate in more intricate networks. A typical pyramidal neuron in the human prefrontal cortex has dendritic arbors that are longer, more branched, and covered with more dendritic spines than comparable neurons in chimpanzee brains. The human prefrontal cortex contains neurons capable of sampling from larger numbers of inputs, creating connectivity patterns that enable more sophisticated information processing. These neurons can integrate information from diverse sources, combining sensory data with memories, emotional states with abstract concepts, immediate perceptions with long-term goals. This integrative capacity is fundamental to the kind of flexible, context-dependent reasoning that characterizes human cognition. A decision about whether to hunt today or wait for better weather requires integrating current conditions, past experience, knowledge of animal behavior, understanding of group needs, anticipation of future events, all processed simultaneously and weighted appropriately. This increased complexity does not emerge instantly at birth. It develops over time, and that developmental timing is itself a crucial part of what makes humans unique. Human brains grow at a rate unusual among primates, following a trajectory that extends key developmental processes far beyond what is seen in other species. Immediately after birth, the human brain undergoes a remarkable growth spurt, expanding rapidly during the first few years of life. In the first year alone, the brain roughly doubles in size. By age 3, it has reached approximately 80% of adult volume. This postnatal brain growth is extraordinary compared to other primates. A newborn human brain is roughly 1/4 the size it will eventually become, weighing about 400 grams compared to an adult brain averaging around 1,400 grams. In contrast, a newborn chimpanzee brain is already closer to half its adult size, and it completes most of its growth much more quickly. This difference means human brains do most of their growing outside the womb, in the world, exposed to environmental influences. While chimpanzees are born with brains that are already fairly mature and complete most of their neural development in the first year or two, human brains remain immature and continue developing for decades. This extended postnatal development has profound implications. It means the human brain is not built according to a rigid genetic blueprint, but instead grows in response to experience. Neural connections multiply explosively in the early years, with synapses forming at rates that reach millions per second. Then, in a process called synaptic pruning, connections that are used are strengthened while those that are not used are eliminated. The brain sculpts itself based on the experiences it encounters, fine-tuning its architecture to match the environment it finds itself in. This is neuroplasticity carried to an extreme, the nervous system remaining flexible and responsive to input for an extended period. But the most remarkable aspect of human brain development is how long it takes. While chimpanzees reach brain maturity by around age 3, human brains continue developing well into the 20s. The prefrontal cortex, in particular, does not fully mature until the mid-20s or even later. This protracted development is an example of a broader evolutionary phenomenon called neoteny, the retention of juvenile characteristics into later stages of development. Humans are, in many respects, permanently juvenilized apes, retaining throughout life traits that in other primates appear only in infancy. Consider the human skull. It is rounded, with a large cranium relative to face size, delicate bone structure, and minimal brow ridges. These are all features seen in infant chimpanzees. As chimpanzees mature, their skulls elongate, brow ridges develop, jaws project forward, creating the distinctive adult ape face. Human skulls never undergo this transformation. We maintain the proportions of juvenile apes, our faces remaining flat, our foreheads high, our heads globular. This is neoteny in physical form, the slowing down of development such that we never reach the morphological endpoint that our primate relatives achieve. Neoteny extends beyond skulls to behavior and cognition. Juvenile animals of many species are playful, curious, exploratory. They learn readily, adapting their behavior based on experience. As they mature, this flexibility typically diminishes. Behavior becomes more stereotyped, more driven by instinct, less open to modification. Adult animals settle into established patterns. Humans never quite do this. We retain throughout life a capacity for play, for curiosity, for learning. We remain behaviorally flexible, in ways that other adult animals are not. This behavioral neoteny, the extension of juvenile learning capacity into adulthood, is perhaps as important to human uniqueness as any structural change in the brain. The evolutionary advantages of neoteny become clear when you consider what it enables. By stretching childhood, by delaying maturity, by keeping the brain plastic and responsive for decades, evolution created an animal exquisitely suited to learning from its environment. In a stable environment, this might be wasteful. If the best way to survive never changes, better to hardwire successful behaviors into the nervous system, have offspring born ready to execute survival strategies without needing to learn them. But if environments are variable, if conditions change, if new challenges constantly arise, then flexibility becomes paramount. A prolonged childhood during which the brain remains open to experience allows each generation to adapt to the specific circumstances they encounter rather than being locked into strategies that worked for their ancestors. This is precisely the situation humans faced during our evolution. Our ancestors moved into diverse and changing environments, encountering new climates, new food sources, new predators, new challenges. They survived not by evolving specific physical adaptations to each new situation, which would have taken many generations, but by evolving the capacity to learn and adapt within a single lifetime. Neoteny provided the developmental framework for this. By keeping the brain immature and plastic for an extended period, it created a window during which culture could shape cognition, during which each individual could be molded to fit their particular social and ecological niche. But this strategy came with costs. The most obvious cost is dependency. A human infant is extraordinarily helpless. It cannot cling to its mother like a chimp infant. It cannot walk, cannot feed itself, cannot regulate its own temperature effectively, cannot defend itself from even the smallest threat. For years, a human child requires constant care and supervision. Even after learning to walk and talk, children remain dependent for an entire decade, incapable of surviving without adult support. This extended childhood places enormous demands on parents and communities, requiring massive investments of time and resources in offspring, who will not contribute productively for many years. No other primate faces this burden to the same degree. Chimpanzee infants are dependent but can at least cling to their mothers, freeing the mother's hands for other activities. They develop motor skills quickly, becoming somewhat self-sufficient within a few years. Human infants must be carried, must be fed and clothed and protected for a period that seems absurdly long in comparison. This extended dependency would seem to be a massive evolutionary disadvantage, a handicap that should have been selected against. The fact that it was not, that humans evolved toward even longer childhoods rather than shorter ones, suggests the benefits must have outweighed the costs. Those benefits become apparent when you consider what happens during that extended childhood. Human children are not merely waiting to mature. They are actively engaged in perhaps the most intensive learning process in nature. They are absorbing language, acquiring cultural knowledge, developing social skills, building mental models of how the world works, learning the specific techniques and traditions of their community. This learning is not just adding information to existing cognitive machinery. It is shaping the machinery itself, rewiring neural circuits, establishing patterns of thought and behavior that will persist throughout life. The human brain at birth is prepared to learn, but not pre-programmed with specific content. It comes equipped with learning mechanisms, with preferences for certain kinds of input like faces and voices, with biases that guide attention and make some associations easier to form than others. But the specifics of what language to learn, what cultural practices to adopt, what knowledge to acquire, all this is left open to be filled in by experience. This is a radically different strategy from what most animals employ, and it requires an extended period of protected learning, a childhood during which the young are shielded from the full demands of survival, while their brains wire themselves to match the cultural environment they inhabit. The nuclear family structure that characterizes human societies may have evolved in part to support this extended childhood. Human children need care not just from a mother but from multiple caregivers over many years. Fathers, grandparents, siblings, extended kin all typically contribute to child rearing in human societies. This cooperative breeding, as anthropologists call it, spreads the burden of supporting helpless young across multiple individuals, making it possible for children to survive their prolonged dependency. Grandmothers, no longer reproducing themselves, invest in grandchildren. Fathers provide resources and protection. Older siblings assist with childcare. This web of support creates the conditions necessary for extended childhood to be viable. The payoff comes in the form of extraordinary adaptability. A human child born in the Arctic learns different skills than a child born in the Sahara, different again from a child born in the rainforest. Language, technology, social customs, survival strategies all vary dramatically across human cultures, and children absorb the particular knowledge relevant to their environment. This allows humans to inhabit an unprecedented range of ecological niches, from frozen tundra to tropical islands, from high mountains to coastal wetlands, from deserts to temperate forests. No other large mammal occupies such diverse environments, and humans do it without significant genetic differentiation between populations. We are biologically the same species whether we live at the equator or the Arctic Circle, succeeding through cultural adaptation supported by our capacity to learn during an extended plastic period of development. The role of teaching in this process cannot be overstated. While some animals demonstrate rudimentary teaching behaviors, passing along specific skills to offspring, humans have elevated teaching to an art form. Human adults actively structure children's learning experiences, breaking complex skills into teachable components, providing feedback, adjusting instruction based on the learner's progress. This requires theory of mind, the ability to understand what the child knows and does not know, to model their mental state and provide exactly the information they need next. It requires language, to explain procedures too complex to learn through observation alone. It requires patience and investment, spending time and effort on teaching that provides no immediate benefit to the teacher. But perhaps most importantly, teaching requires a learner who is prepared to be taught, who can understand that another person is trying to convey information, who can recognize instructional intent and respond appropriately. Human children are prepared for this. From a very young age, they attend to adult demonstrations, they seek out teaching, they ask questions, they monitor their own understanding and request clarification when confused. This is active learning, not passive absorption, and it requires cognitive sophistication on the part of both teacher and student. The combination of extended childhood, neuroplasticity, teaching, and active learning creates a powerful mechanism for cultural transmission. Knowledge accumulates across generations not merely through imitation, but through intentional instruction. Each generation can build on what previous generations discovered, not starting from scratch but inheriting a foundation of accumulated wisdom. The child learning to make stone tools is not independently discovering how to strike rocks together. They're receiving expert instruction, learning techniques refined over countless generations, absorbing in months or years what might have taken millennia to discover through trial and error. This is possible because the human brain remains plastic long enough to absorb complex cultural information, because human adults invest the time and effort necessary to teach, and because human children are motivated and capable, learners who can benefit from instruction. Remove any of these elements, shorten childhood, reduce plasticity, eliminate teaching, make children less receptive to instruction, and the system breaks down. The pieces fit together, each reinforcing the others, creating a coherent evolutionary strategy centered on learning and culture. Yet this strategy also creates vulnerabilities. The extended period of brain plasticity that allows for such rich learning also means the brain is susceptible to negative influences for an extended period. Traumatic experiences during childhood can shape neural development in ways that persist throughout life. Malnutrition, stress, neglect, abuse, all can disrupt normal brain maturation, creating lasting cognitive and emotional difficulties. The very openness to experience that makes human development so adaptive also makes it vulnerable to damage. Moreover, the dependency of childhood creates social complexity. Human groups must organize themselves to support children for extended periods, creating obligations and relationships that go beyond the immediate mother-offspring bond. This may have driven the evolution of complex social structures, of kinship systems that specify who is responsible for which children, of norms about sharing and cooperation that ensure children receive adequate care even if their parents are unable to provide it. Human sociality may be as much a response to the needs of our neotenous offspring as it is to the challenges of hunting or defense. The extended childhood also creates generational tensions. Children and adolescents in many human societies push against adult authority, testing boundaries, establishing independence. This seems almost paradoxical given how dependent young humans are, but it may reflect the need to eventually transition to adulthood despite retaining juvenile characteristics. The conflict between extended immaturity and the eventual need for independence creates a developmental challenge that human societies resolve through various coming-of-age rituals, gradual transfers of responsibility, and cultural frameworks that define stages of maturation. What makes human social learning particularly powerful is not just its duration, but its quality. Humans do not simply observe and imitate. We learn through multiple sophisticated mechanisms that other species rarely, if ever, employ. Teaching, as already mentioned, is one such mechanism, but there are others equally important. One is over-imitation, the tendency of human children to copy not just the functional aspects of a behavior, but every detail of how an adult performs it, even elements that serve no purpose. If an adult performs an unnecessarily complex sequence to achieve a simple goal, a human child will faithfully reproduce the entire sequence, irrelevant steps and all. Chimpanzees, shown the same demonstration, focus only on the functional elements, ignoring the unnecessary actions. This over-imitation might seem inefficient, a waste of effort copying useless behaviors. But it serves a crucial cultural function. Many human techniques involve steps whose purpose is not immediately obvious. A child watching an adult prepare a complex meal or craft a tool cannot always distinguish which actions are essential and which are optional. By copying everything, the child ensures they capture the important elements even if they do not yet understand why. They are important. Over generations, this faithful copying preserves techniques in their entirety, preventing the loss of subtle but crucial details. Cultural traditions persist because children copy them completely, not selectively. Human children also engage in what researchers call natural pedagogy, a suite of behaviors specifically adapted for learning from teachers. They pay special attention to demonstrations that include pedagogical cues, signals that indicate an adult is trying to teach rather than simply performing an action. Eye contact, certain tones of voice, specific gestures, all can mark an interaction as pedagogical, triggering heightened attention and learning. When these cues are present, children assume that what they are being shown represents general knowledge, something true across contexts, not just a one-time action. This allows for efficient transmission of abstract rules and generalizable skills. Moreover, human children actively seek information. They ask questions, an enormous number of questions, sometimes to the exhaustion of parents. These questions are not random. Children ask about causes, about purposes, about categories and relationships. Why is the sky blue? How does that work? What is that for? These questions reveal a drive to understand, to build mental models of how the world operates, not just to accumulate facts, but to construct explanatory frameworks. And adults, for the most part, patiently answer, providing explanations tailored to the child's level of understanding, gradually building up their conceptual knowledge. This combination of teaching, over-imitation, natural pedagogy, and active inquiry creates a cultural transmission system more powerful than anything observed in other species. Knowledge flows from expert to novice with high fidelity. Techniques are preserved across generations. Innovations accumulate. Understanding deepens. Each child absorbs not just behaviors but the conceptual frameworks underlying those behaviors, not just what to do but why to do it, not just surface actions but deep principles. The result is that human cultural traditions can become extraordinarily complex, far exceeding what any individual could invent from scratch. Consider the technology involved in processing certain plant foods. Many nutritious plants contain toxins that must be removed through elaborate procedures, soaking, leaching, heating, fermenting, processing that may take days and involve multiple steps. No individual could discover these procedures through trial and error without poisoning themselves. They persist because they are taught, because knowledge accumulates over generations, because cultural transmission preserves the hard-won discoveries of ancestors. Or consider navigation techniques developed by Pacific Islander cultures, systems for reading waves, currents, star positions, bird movements, all integrated into elaborate mental maps that enabled voyages across thousands of kilometers of open ocean without instruments. These techniques represent generations of accumulated knowledge, observations and insights added incrementally, tested through experience, passed down through apprenticeship. No single navigator invented this system. It emerged through cultural evolution, shaped by the collective experience of countless voyagers. Language itself is perhaps the ultimate example of culturally transmitted complexity. Every human language is a vast system of arbitrary conventions, sounds mapped to meanings through shared agreement within a speech community. Children absorb this system without explicit instruction, extracting grammatical patterns from the speech they hear, inferring rules that they have never been taught, generalizing in ways that demonstrate they are not merely memorizing but building internal grammars. This is only possible because of specialized learning mechanisms, neural circuitry devoted to language acquisition, but it also requires a community of speakers and extended exposure during the critical period when the language learning system is most active. The languages humans speak shape how they think in subtle but measurable ways. While the strong version of linguistic relativity, the idea that language determines thought completely, has been largely rejected, weaker versions that suggest language influences certain aspects of cognition have empirical support. Speakers of languages with elaborate colour vocabularies distinguish subtle colour differences more easily than speakers of languages with fewer colour terms. Languages that use absolute directions like north and south, rather than relative ones like left and right, train speakers to maintain constant awareness of cardinal directions. Grammatical structures that require speakers to specify evidential markers, indicating whether they witnessed an event personally or heard about it second-hand, make speakers more attentive to sources of information. These effects do not mean that speakers of different languages cannot think similar thoughts, only that language influences which aspects of experience receive attention, how readily certain distinctions are made, what categories feel natural. Language is a tool for thought, and like any tool, its specific features make some tasks easier and others more difficult. The diversity of human languages represents different solutions to the problem of mapping thought onto communicable form, and each solution emphasizes different aspects of experience. This linguistic diversity, these thousands of distinct languages, each with its own phonology, grammar and vocabulary, all arose within a single species over a relatively short evolutionary time frame. It is cultural variation, not biological variation. A child of any ancestry can learn any language with equal facility, if exposed during the critical period. This demonstrates the power of cultural evolution to create diversity far exceeding what biological evolution could produce in the same time span. Where biological evolution produces different species adapted to different environments, cultural evolution produces different cultures within the same species, each adapted to different challenges through knowledge and tradition rather than genes. The relationship between biological and cultural evolution in humans is complex. Cultural changes can create selection pressures that drive biological evolution, a process called gene-culture coevolution. The classic example is lactase persistence, the ability to digest milk sugar in adulthood. Most mammals lose the ability to produce lactase, the enzyme that breaks down milk sugar, after weaning. But in populations with long histories of dairy farming, genetic mutations that keep lactase production active into adulthood became common because they provided a nutritional advantage in cultures where dairy products were dietary staples. The cultural practice of dairy farming created selection, pressure for the genetic change enabling lactose tolerance. Similar processes may have operated for many human traits. Cooking selected for smaller teeth and jaws, changes in gut anatomy, alterations in digestive enzymes. Clothing and shelter reduced selection pressure for body hair and subcutaneous fat. Agriculture created new disease environments, selecting for immune system variants that conferred resistance to diseases that flourished in dense settlements. In each case, cultural innovations changed the selective landscape, and human biology evolved in response. The evolution of cooperation itself may exemplify gene-culture coevolution. As human groups became larger and more dependent on cooperation for survival, individuals who could cooperate effectively would have had advantages. This created selection pressure for psychological traits that facilitate cooperation like empathy, fairness concerns, trust, willingness to punish cheaters. These traits are partly innate, shaped by genes, but they are also heavily influenced by culture, by norms and institutions that encourage or discourage cooperative behavior. Genes and culture co-evolved, each shaping the other, producing humans who are both biologically predisposed to cooperate and culturally embedded in systems that structure how cooperation operates. The human moral sense illustrates this interaction. Across cultures, humans demonstrate intuitions about fairness, reciprocity, harm, loyalty, authority, purity. These moral foundations appear early in development and show cross-cultural regularities, suggesting biological roots. But how these foundations are weighted, which are emphasized and which downplayed, varies enormously across cultures. Some cultures prioritize individual rights and harm avoidance. Others emphasize group loyalty and respect for authority. Still, others focus on purity and sacred values. Culture shapes the expression of moral intuitions, even while those intuitions have biological foundations. This means that understanding human nature requires understanding both biology and culture, genes and environment, evolution and history. We cannot reduce humans to their genes, because culture shapes development profoundly. But we cannot ignore biology either, because it sets parameters and provides predispositions that culture works with and within. Human nature is the product of a complex interaction between inherited tendencies and learned behaviors, between evolutionary history and cultural context. One area where this interaction is particularly evident is in the domain of emotions. Humans experience a wide range of emotions, many of which we share with other mammals. Fear, anger, joy, sadness, disgust, all have clear analogues in other species and appear to be evolutionarily ancient. But humans also experience more complex emotions that seem to require cultural scaffolding. Shame, guilt, embarrassment, pride. These self-conscious emotions involve awareness of how others perceive us, understanding of social norms, concern for reputation. They likely depend on theory of mind and are shaped by cultural values about what behaviors are praiseworthy or shameful. Moreover, how emotions are expressed and regulated varies across cultures. Some cultures encourage open emotional expression, others value emotional restraint. What situations trigger which emotions, how intensely emotions are felt, how long they persist, all show cultural variation. Yet underlying this variation are biological systems, brain regions and neural circuits and hormones that mediate emotional responses. Culture does not create emotions from nothing, but rather shapes the expression of emotionally relevant biological systems. The interaction between biology and culture also plays out in human development, where genetic influences and environmental influences interweave throughout life. Genes do not determine outcomes directly, but instead create tendencies, making some developmental paths more likely than others depending on environmental circumstances. A child with genetic predispositions toward extroversion may develop into a gregarious adult in a supportive environment, but may become more withdrawn if raised in harsh conditions. Genes and environment interact, and neither can be understood in isolation from the other. This gene-environment interaction means that human nature is not fixed but flexible, not determined but probabilistic. The same genotype can produce different phenotypes depending on experience, and this flexibility is itself an evolved feature, an adaptation to variable environments. By building plasticity into development, evolution created organisms that can adjust to diverse circumstances without requiring genetic changes. The extended childhood, the neural plasticity, the capacity for learning, all are biological features that enable environmental shaping of cognition and behavior. Yet there are limits to this plasticity. Not everything is culturally variable. Humans everywhere learn language, form social attachments, distinguish kin from non-kin, experience basic emotions, recognize faces, engage in causal reasoning. These are human universals, features that appear across all cultures despite wide variation in environmental conditions. They suggest deep biological foundations, cognitive architectures that development reliably produces given any reasonably normal environment. The existence of universals alongside cultural variation indicates that human nature includes both fixed and flexible elements, both inherited predispositions and learned behaviors. We are neither blank slates, written on purely by experience, nor genetically determined automatons. We are complex systems where biology provides structure and culture fills in content, where genes create possibilities and environment determines which possibilities are realized. Understanding this complexity is essential for understanding the missing mental link. It is not just that humans have bigger brains or more complex language or enhanced social cognition. It is that we have a particular kind of developmental system, one that interweaves biological maturation and cultural learning across an extended time frame, creating feedback loops where each influences the other. Brain development enables cultural learning, which shapes brain development, which enables more cultural learning in a cycle that continues throughout childhood and even into adulthood. This developmental system is itself the product of evolution, a biological adaptation for creating minds that are both structured and flexible, both constrained by our evolutionary heritage and open to cultural shaping. It allows each generation to innovate while building on the past, to adapt to local conditions while maintaining connection to universal human capacities, to create cultural diversity while remaining biologically unified as a species. Interestingly, the pattern of neoteny in humans is not absolute. While we retain many juvenile characteristics, we also exhibit some perimorphic traits, features that develop beyond what is seen in ancestral species. Our long legs relative to body size, our prominent noses, certain aspects of our sexual dimorphism, these represent developments beyond what infant apes display. Human evolution has been mosaic, some features extending juvenile patterns, others following different trajectories. This patchwork of changes suggests multiple selective pressures operating simultaneously, pulling human development in different directions for different traits. The genetic basis of neoteny in humans remains an area of active research. Studies comparing gene expression in human and chimpanzee brains have found that humans show delayed activation of many genes, particularly those involved in synaptic formation and neural maturation. In the prefrontal cortex, genes related to neuronal development stay active longer in humans than in chimpanzees, consistent with the extended period of brain maturation. Some of these differences involve regulatory changes, alterations in when and how genes are turned on or off, rather than changes to the genes themselves. This suggests that relatively small changes in developmental timing mechanisms could have large effects on brain development and cognition. One gene that has received particular attention is FOXP2, sometimes called the language gene, though that term is oversimplified. Mutations in FOXP2 cause severe language impairments in humans, and the human version of the gene differs from the chimpanzee version in ways that may have functional significance. FOXP2 is involved in neural development and synaptic plasticity, particularly in circuits related to vocal learning. While it is certainly not the only gene relevant to language, its role in neural development suggests that genetic changes affecting brain maturation patterns could have contributed to human cognitive evolution. However, focusing on individual genes risks missing the forest for the trees. The human brain is not the product of one or two genetic changes, but of many modifications accumulating over millions of years. Some changes affected brain size, others modified connectivity patterns, still others altered developmental timing. Some were specific to humans, others shared with other apes or primates. Teasing apart which changes were critical to human uniqueness and which were incidental or shared with related species remains a major challenge. What is clear is that the final product, the modern human brain, operates according to principles that create the cognitive capacities we have discussed. Its size provides raw computational power, more neurons processing more information in parallel. Its organization, particularly the expansion of association cortices that integrate information from multiple sources, enables complex cognition. Its developmental trajectory, with extended plasticity and neoteny, allows for cultural shaping of neural circuits. Its connectivity patterns, with elaborate networks linking distant brain regions, permit the kind of integrative processing necessary for language, abstract thought, and flexible problem-solving. The human brain is also remarkably expensive to maintain. It consumes roughly 20% of the body's energy budget despite representing only about 2% of body weight. This enormous metabolic cost would be unsustainable without corresponding benefits. Humans must eat high-quality, energy-rich foods to fuel their brains, and much of human evolution has been shaped by the need to obtain adequate nutrition. The development of cooking, for instance, by making food more digestible and nutrients more available, may have been crucial in supporting the evolution of larger brains. Cooking itself requires cognitive abilities, planning to gather fuel and food, controlling fire, preparing ingredients in specific ways, timing the cooking process. Yet these abilities depend on having a brain large and complex enough to perform such tasks. This creates a feedback loop, where better nutrition supports larger brains, which enable better food processing techniques, which support even larger brains. Dietary changes and brain evolution likely influenced each other in a co-evolutionary process, stretching across hundreds of thousands of years. The social brain hypothesis offers another perspective on why human brains became so large and complex. This hypothesis proposes that the primary driver of brain expansion in primates was not ecological challenges like finding food, but social challenges like navigating complex group dynamics. Living in large social groups creates cognitive demands. You must remember who is allied with whom, who owes favours, who has higher or lower status, who is trustworthy and who is not. You must predict how others will react to your actions, form and maintain. Coalitions communicate and cooperate, compete and reconcile. These social cognitive demands may have selected for larger brains with enhanced capacities for memory, theory of mind and social reasoning. Humans live in extraordinarily large and complex social groups. While chimpanzee communities might number a few dozen individuals, human societies routinely include hundreds or thousands of people, connected through webs of kinship, friendship, trade, and political alliance. Managing these relationships requires keeping track of vast amounts of social information, recognizing faces and voices, remembering names and relationships, understanding social norms and cultural expectations. The cognitive load of human sociality is immense. Some anthropologists have proposed a rough correlation between brain size and maximum social group size across primates, suggesting that human brain size predicts stable social groups of around 150 individuals. This number, sometimes called Dunbar's number after the researcher who proposed it, supposedly represents the number of people with whom one can maintain stable social relationships. Beyond this size, groups tend to fragment or require more formal organizational structures to maintain cohesion. Whether this specific number is accurate remains debated, but the general principle that brain size relates to social complexity has considerable support. The human capacity for culture may have further amplified the selective pressure for larger brains. Once cultural knowledge became important to survival, individuals who could learn more effectively, remember more information, teach more successfully, and innovate new solutions would have had advantages. This created selection pressure for enhanced learning abilities, better memory, more flexible cognition, all of which would favour larger, more complex brains. Culture and brain evolution would thus have engaged in another feedback loop, cultural complexity, selecting for cognitive abilities which enabled more complex culture, which selected for even greater cognitive abilities. This raises a fascinating question about the relationship between brain size and intelligence. Within humans, brain size correlates weakly with measures of intelligence, but the relationship is far from perfect. Many factors beyond sheer size influence cognitive ability, including connectivity patterns, neuron density, efficiency of neural transmission, even nutritional status and educational opportunity. Across species, the relationship between brain size and cognition is even more complicated. Whales have large brains but do not appear to have human-level cognition. Crows have tiny brains but demonstrate sophisticated problem-solving. Clearly, something beyond simple size matters. One factor that may be relevant is the ratio of brain size to body size. Smaller animals need proportionately larger brains simply to control their bodies and process sensory input. Taking body size into account, humans have exceptionally large brains for their body mass. This ratio, called the encephalization quotient, provides a crude measure of excess brain capacity that might be available for complex cognition beyond basic body maintenance. Humans have the highest encephalization quotient of any species, suggesting we have more neural tissue relative to our size than any other animal. But even this metric has limitations. A small animal with a high ratio might have a tiny brain that is nonetheless proportionately large for its body. The absolute number of neurons also matters, as does how those neurons are organized, where in the brain they are located, how they are connected. The relationship between brain structure and cognitive function is multifaceted, and no single measurement captures it completely. Brain size is important but not determinative. Organization, connectivity, development all contribute to the final cognitive capabilities that emerge. What unites all these factors is that they are aspects of the same evolutionary process. Natural selection does not optimize one feature at a time. It acts on whole organisms living in complex environments. The human brain evolved in the context of a body that walked upright, hands that manipulated tools, a throat that could produce complex vocalizations, a digestive system that processed cooked food, a social structure that supported cooperative breeding, a life history that included extended childhood. All of these features are connected. Changes in one area created selective pressures or opportunities in others. The result is a tightly integrated system where separating cause from effect becomes difficult. Consider the hand. The human hand is extraordinarily dexterous, capable of precise manipulations that exceed what any other primate can accomplish. This dexterity enabled sophisticated tool use, which created selection pressure for the cognitive abilities to design and manufacture complex tools, which made tool use even more important to survival, which further selected for both manual dexterity and cognitive sophistication. Hand and brain co-evolved, each making the other more useful. You cannot explain the evolution of the human mind without considering the evolution of the human hand, and vice versa. Similarly, the human vocal tract is uniquely configured for producing the range of sounds required for language. The descended larynx, the mobile tongue, the precise control of breath and vocal fold tension, all are adaptations that enable speech. But these anatomical features would be useless without neural circuits to control them precisely, to generate the complex motor sequences necessary for articulating words, to coordinate breathing and phonation. Vocal anatomy and neural control systems evolved together, each development making the other more valuable. Language required both anatomical and cognitive changes, and these did not happen in isolation. Even walking upright connects to the evolution of the human mind. Bipedalism freed the hands, enabling carrying of objects, tools, and infants, but it also narrowed the birth canal, creating the obstetric dilemma mentioned earlier, where larger brains must pass through a narrower pelvis. This may have contributed to the evolution of earlier birth and extended postnatal development. Walking upright also changed social dynamics, making the face more visible during communication, potentially selecting for facial expressions as communication signals. It altered the body's biomechanics, freeing the shoulder for throwing, which requires precise predictive cognition to calculate trajectories. Every change rippled through the entire organism. This interconnectedness means that the missing mental link is not a single thing, but a constellation of related changes, physical and cognitive, anatomical and behavioral, genetic and developmental. It is a different brain structure, yes, but also a different larynx, a different hand, a different birth canal, a different childhood, a different social structure, a different diet. All of these co-evolved, influencing each other, creating feedback loops that amplified certain trends. The result was not just a smarter ape, but a fundamentally different kind of organism, one whose way of life centered on cognition, learning, culture, and cooperation in ways unprecedented in the history of life. And still, we have only described the machinery, the substrate. We have talked about brains and development, neurons and neoteny, hands and larynxes, but not about what it feels like to be conscious, to experience the world from a first-person perspective, to have subjective awareness. This is the hard problem of consciousness, the question of how and why physical processes in the brain give rise to subjective experience. It is one thing to explain how the brain processes information, quite another to explain why processing information should feel like anything at all. Some philosophers argue that consciousness is not unique to humans, that any animal with a nervous system probably has some form of subjective experience. A dog feels pain, a bird experiences the visual world, a fish senses its environment. These experiences may be very different from human experience, but they are experiences nonetheless. If this view is correct, then human consciousness is not categorically different from animal consciousness, merely more elaborate, more self-reflective, more linguistic. Others propose that human consciousness is qualitatively distinct, that the capacity for language and symbolic thought creates a form of awareness unavailable to other species. When you can think about your own thoughts, reflect on your own mental states, tell yourself stories about who you are and what you're experiencing, you create a kind of consciousness that may be genuinely new. Human consciousness on this view is not just aware, but aware of being aware, not just experiencing, but narrating the experience, turning raw sensation into meaningful episodes in an ongoing life story. The truth probably lies somewhere in between. Animals surely have subjective experiences, consciousness of some form. But human consciousness, shaped by language and culture, by narrative and abstraction, by reflection and self-awareness, has qualities that appear unique. We do not just experience fear, we conceptualize it, name it, analyze it, wonder about its causes, try to control it. We do not just remember past events, we construct autobiographical narratives, organizing our memories into a coherent life story that defines our identity. We do not just perceive the present, we imagine futures and pasts, dwelling in mental time travel that takes us far from the here and now. This elaborated, reflective, narrative consciousness may be one of the most important aspects of human uniqueness, yet it is also one of the most difficult to study. We cannot directly access animal consciousness to know what their experience is like. We can only infer from their behavior and brain activity, and behavior can be explained in multiple ways. An animal might behave as though it is aware without having subjective experience, or it might have rich inner experience that its behavior fails to reveal. The philosophical problem of other minds applies as much to animals as to other humans. What we can say is that the cognitive abilities we have discussed, language, symbolic thought, theory of mind, metacognition, probably transform consciousness in significant ways. Language allows us to think in words, to have internal monologues, to organize experience linguistically. Symbolic thought allows us to represent abstract concepts, to think about things that do not exist, to imagine alternatives to reality. Theory of mind allows us to model other consciousness, to simulate what others might be thinking or feeling. Metacognition allows us to observe our own minds, to treat our thoughts as objects of reflection. Each of these abilities likely changes the character of consciousness, adding layers of complexity and self-awareness. The result is a form of consciousness that can question its own nature, wonder about its origins, seek to understand itself. This recursive self-examination, consciousness studying consciousness, is perhaps the ultimate expression of human uniqueness. No other species, so far as we know, worries about the nature of its own awareness, builds philosophical systems to explain experience, conducts scientific investigations into the neural basis of consciousness. This capacity for self-directed inquiry, for asking questions about questions, for turning the tools of cognition onto cognition itself, represents a kind of cognitive closure, the mind becoming fully aware of itself as a mind. Yet even this recursive self-awareness has limits. We can think about our thinking, but can we think about thinking About our thinking? How many levels of reflection can we achieve before the stack collapses? There appears to be a limit to how much we can introspect, how deeply we can examine our own cognitive processes. Much of what the brain does remains invisible to consciousness. We do not have direct access to our perceptual processing, our memory formation, our decision-making mechanisms. These operate beneath awareness, and consciousness only receives their outputs, the final products of computations it never directly observes. This has led some researchers to propose that consciousness is something like the brain's user interface, a simplified representation of what is happening beneath the surface, much like a computer desktop shows you icons and windows but hides the underlying code. We experience ourselves as unified agents making conscious choices, but this may be an illusion created by the brain to make sense of its own massively parallel distributed processing. The real work happens in unconscious systems, and consciousness constructs a narrative that makes it seem like there is a single self in control. If this view is correct, then understanding the missing mental link requires understanding not just what makes human consciousness possible, but also what makes it necessary. Why did evolution produce subjective experience at all? What advantage does consciousness confer that unconscious information processing could not provide? Some argue consciousness allows for flexible integration of information, for holding multiple perspectives simultaneously, for creative combination of concepts in ways that rigid unconscious systems cannot achieve. Others suggest consciousness is an evolutionary spandrel, a byproduct of other adaptations rather than an adaptation itself. These questions remain unresolved, part of the deep mystery that persists at the heart of human nature. We can trace the evolution of our brains, identify the cognitive abilities that make us unique, describe the physical mechanisms that underlie thought and language, yet the subjective experience of being human, the what it is like to be conscious, remains elusive. This may always be the case. Perhaps some aspects of mind cannot be fully captured by objective description, cannot be reduced to neural firing patterns and information processing. The first-person perspective might be irreducibly subjective, accessible only from within, forever resistant to complete third-person explanation. But this uncertainty, this inability to fully explain our own minds, is itself very human. We are creatures who can recognize the limits of our knowledge, who can formulate questions we cannot yet answer, who can systematically work toward deeper understanding, even knowing we may never achieve complete comprehension. That capacity, that drive to know, that ability to stand in uncertainty while still reaching toward truth, may be as distinctively human as anything else we have discussed. The missing mental link includes not just what makes us smart, but what makes us curious, not just what enables us to know, but what compels us to seek knowledge even where it cannot be found. As we look toward the future, the question becomes not what made us human, but what will continue to make us human as we ourselves change. Cultural evolution now proceeds at unprecedented speed, transforming human life in ways that our Pleistocene ancestors could never have imagined. Digital technology extends cognition beyond biological brains, allowing us to offload memory to devices, to communicate instantly across continents, to access information that once would have required years of study. Artificial intelligence begins to replicate and in some domains exceed human cognitive capabilities, raising questions about what remains uniquely human when machines can think. Some researchers speculate that we're in the midst of another cognitive revolution, one driven not by biological evolution but by technological augmentation. Just as the first cognitive revolution transformed apes into humans, this new revolution might transform humans into something else, something we do not yet have words to describe. But unlike biological evolution, which operates over thousands of generations, technological change happens within decades, within single lifetimes. The speed of this transformation raises urgent questions about human identity, about what aspects of human cognition are essential to preserve and what aspects might be enhanced or replaced. Yet for all these changes, the fundamental architecture of the human mind remains the same. We are still creatures with neotenous brains, still learning through extended childhoods, still transmitting culture across generations, still thinking in language, still creating symbolic meanings, still wondering about our place in the cosmos. The missing mental link that made us human tens of thousands of years ago continues to define us today. Understanding that link, that constellation of cognitive and biological changes that transformed our ancestors into something new, helps us understand who we are and what we might become. The conversation between past and future, between biology and culture, between brain and mind continues. And we remain, as we have always been, the species that asks what it means to be. The stars that our ancestors learned to navigate by still shine in the night sky. The questions they asked about their place in the world still echo in our wondering. The cognitive revolution that made them human continues in every act of learning, every moment of insight, every instance of shared understanding. We remain connected to that ancient transformation, beneficiaries of the mental gifts it bestowed, still exploring the territories of mind it opened, still discovering what it means to be a creature who can ask what it means to be.